Trinity Myles stared at the dean, her hands trembling as he slid a file across the table, labeled unfit to continue. Her voice cracked. But I aced every exam. Behind him, the screen flickered to a fake IP address used to submit her final paper, one she never wrote. A professor's voice whispered behind the glass. She solved the puzzle. Now she's the problem. And just like that, Cambridge decided to erase her. But Trinity had already recorded everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport had never felt heavier to Trinity Myles, not because of the suitcases weighing her hands down, but because of the weight of every eye in her community watching her go. They had pooled money, hosted bake sales, and sold custom t-shirts with Trinity to Cambridge printed across them. This wasn't just her dream, it was a neighborhood's redemption, a history rewritten. She was their hope stitched into a student visa. She had never left the country before, never needed a passport until now. And as she boarded the plane with her mother's hand still clinging to her elbow, she whispered, "I'll come back with something better than a degree." Her mother squeezed tighter and nodded, her eyes glassy but proud. "You already are." Landing in England was like stepping into another century. The gray skies were cold, the people colder, and Cambridge, it looked like a museum someone forgot to shut down for tourists. But for Trinity, those halls weren't just architecture, they were battlegrounds. Every arched doorway, every clock tower whispered, "You don't belong here." She had been accepted into the Department of Theoretical Mathematics, a field where even the brilliant flinch. Her SAT scores were immaculate, her recommendation letters glowing, and her entry essay, detailing a novel approach to Poincaré's conjecture, had gone viral in academic circles. But here, she was reduced to a symbol. To many in these cloistered walls, she wasn't a genius, she was a headline. The first time she entered the halls of Trinity College, ironic, given her name, she felt the hush, not the reverent kind, but the surgical kind, sterile, disapproving. Students passed her in silent clusters, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. She wore braids, bright sneakers, her accent carried traces of Atlanta's rhythm. She was unapologetically herself, and that made her visible in the worst way. The faculty weren't subtle. One professor had glanced at her during a department welcome and muttered just loud enough, "A scholarship experiment, I presume." Another offered her directions, twice as if assuming she was lost. The only warmth came from Dr. Elaine Beckett, a younger professor who offered a quick wink during their first meeting. "If they stare any harder, they'll go blind," she whispered. But Trinity didn't flinch. She took notes. She observed, and when asked to introduce herself at a department mixer, she didn't list her GPA or test scores. She said, "I'm Trinity Myles. I solve problems that keep other people up at night." The room went silent, not in awe but in discomfort. The real moment, though, came at orientation. An event meant to welcome the incoming cohort, held in a grand hall with floors so polished they reflected the cathedral windows above. Trinity took her seat near the front, eyes scanning the list of speakers. The name Professor Reginald Cromwell was circled in red. Cromwell was a legend at Cambridge, and not in the good way. He had written half the textbooks used in advanced mathematics courses, and whispered rumors claimed he had once denied tenure to a promising candidate simply for quoting James Baldwin in a lecture. Trinity knew what she was walking into, but she hadn't expected what came next. The students settled. The doors closed, and then Cromwell walked in. He was tall, severe, with a face carved in suspicion, and a voice that floated above the room like poison and perfume. He gave the standard welcome, made a joke about wishing calculators could take exams for students, and then paused, scanning the room. His eyes locked on Trinity like a spotlight. "Miss Myles," he said, his tone syrupy with false politeness. "I've heard quite the buzz about you." Trinity looked up. "Thank you, Professor. Atlanta, was it?" "That's quite a leap. From the Peach State to the Queensland." He smiled, then reached into his leather satchel. "I've got a little tradition for my, shall we say, promising students." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed and bent. He walked toward her, the room now dead silent. Students turned, watching. Trinity kept her spine straight. "This," he said, handing her the paper, "is a little puzzle I give out every now and then. Purely for fun, a rite of passage, if you will. Let's see how quickly you drop out." A few nervous chuckles escaped the crowd. Not from humor, but from fear. Trinity looked at the page. The problem was long, obscenely long. It wasn't just a puzzle. It was a layered mathematical trap, disguised in innocent variables, and the way he looked at her, like he'd just handed her a loaded gun, made the message clear. This wasn't a challenge. It was a performance. A test she was meant to fail. She blinked once, then twice, and then slowly, with calm fingers, folded the paper and tucked it into her notebook. "Should I time myself?" she asked without a trace of sarcasm. Cromwell's smile twitched. "No need. It's unsolvable." He paused. "But I'm sure you'll enjoy trying." The room rustled again. Trinity's hands were still. Her eyes didn't blink. And in that moment, the story of her entire Cambridge existence had been written in invisible ink. She was not there to learn. She was there to be watched, to be challenged not for her intellect, but for her audacity. The orientation continued, but nothing else stuck. She felt the stairs burn holes into her back. When the students were dismissed, Cromwell passed her once more. She half expected him to offer a follow-up taunt, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned in just enough to whisper, "Let's see if you can survive this equation, Miss Myles." She didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any retort. Later that evening, in the quiet of her dorm room, she unfolded the puzzle, not because she wanted to play his game, but because she knew this wasn't just a test of math. It was a declaration of war, and Trinity Myles had never been one to retreat. But as she stared at the equations, tracing variables with her pen, something unexpected caught her attention. A subtle inconsistency, a line that seemed familiar. Her eyes widened. She flipped through her own notes, the ones she'd written in high school, late nights fueled by Red Bull and ambition. No, it couldn't be. She leaned closer. It was. Buried inside the problem Cromwell handed her was a theorem she had already begun solving years ago. A problem she had mapped out with her former mentor, Mr. Diaz, a retired professor from Emory University. This wasn't just a test. This was her own work, twisted, rearranged, and handed back to her as a humiliation. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. Cromwell had used her brilliance as bait. He had stolen from her, only to dare her to reclaim it. The next morning, Trinity entered the lecture hall early. Cromwell stood at the front, setting up his notes. She walked up to him, met his eyes, and wordlessly placed the folded puzzle back onto his desk. "Solved," she said, and as his lips parted to laugh, he saw the answer scrawled in her handwriting. His smirk collapsed into silence. The paper Trinity laid on Professor Cromwell's desk wasn't just a folded sheet. It was a confrontation. The answer she'd scrawled across it wasn't just correct. It was revolutionary. But she didn't wait for acknowledgement. She didn't expect any. She simply turned, walked to her seat, and let the silence follow her. Cromwell's fingers hovered above the page, hesitant in a way that betrayed his reputation. His brows narrowed, jaw tight. He unfolded the paper with the same caution a soldier might show disarming a bomb. He scanned the first line, and his expression remained steady. The second line made him blink. By the third, his lips parted slightly, not in awe but in disbelief. Trinity sat motionless, her notebook closed in front of her. Students filed into the room behind her, chattering about weekend plans and housing assignments. None of them noticed the storm brewing in Cromwell's mind. As he stared at the proof, the lines she'd written were not guesses. They were layered, logical, airtight, a proof with no gaps, no appeals to approximation. Each step echoed with the kind of clarity mathematicians chase for decades. The problem he'd handed her, masked as a joke, delivered with a smirk, was never meant to be solved. It had circled Cambridge for over 40 years, whispered between faculty during late-night discussions, offered as an inside joke, an unspoken gatekeeping ritual. It had roots in topology, wrapped in abstract algebra, disguised as a harmless thought experiment, and yet she solved it in one night. No, not one night. She solved it from memory, because it had once been hers. He folded the paper and tucked it into his leather-bound planner without a word. "We'll begin," he said to the class, as if the page didn't exist, as if Trinity hadn't just lit a fire under centuries of silence. But Trinity wasn't naive. She recognized the look in his eyes, not fear, not even anger. It was something colder, something more practiced. It was denial sharpened into dismissal. As the lecture began, his voice droned about variable transformations and symmetry functions. Trinity followed along, But her mind kept circling the problem. Not just the puzzle itself, but why he had chosen her. Why now? Why this puzzle? When class ended, she lingered. Students shuffled out, their bags slung lazily over shoulders. Cromwell didn't look up as he packed his notes. Trinity stood by the front, arms crossed, until the last student left. "You knew I'd seen that proof before," she said quietly. He paused, then slowly closed his satchel. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Miss Myles. That proof is based on a structure I published online 3 years ago. Under my name. You altered the variables, flipped the sequence, but the backbone is the same." He finally looked up. His expression was unreadable. "Even if it were, Miss Myles, you should be grateful. Very few students get a chance to test themselves against problems of that caliber." "Grateful?" she repeated. "Cambridge is not Atlanta. Here, brilliance doesn't grant immunity from scrutiny. It demands it." Trinity stepped forward. Her voice didn't rise, but it landed hard. "You didn't hand me a puzzle. You handed me my own work, hoping I wouldn't recognize it. And when I solved it, you went quiet. Not because it wasn't impressive, but because it was." He smiled then, the way some men smile before closing a door. "Be careful, Miss Myles. Arrogance is a fragile companion. It walks you into rooms your competence can't keep you in." She left without another word. That night, Trinity couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but calculation. She dug through her old notes, pulled screenshots of the original proof she had uploaded to a now-defunct student forum. It was still there, archived on the Wayback Machine, time-stamped and under her name. The foundation was unmistakable. The theft wasn't just intellectual, it was strategic. Cromwell hadn't picked the puzzle randomly. He'd picked it because he knew she'd recognize it. Because he wanted her to think it was hers, but also doubt herself. A weaponized coincidence, an attempt to fracture her confidence while keeping his own hands clean. But he miscalculated something critical. Trinity didn't doubt what she built. The next morning, word had spread, though inaccurately. A few students mentioned that the new girl had tried solving the Cromwell puzzle. One or two even joked that she actually thought she did it. But none knew the truth. None knew she had solved it, because Cromwell hadn't said a word. The silence was intentional. If he acknowledged her solution, he'd have to explain how she solved a puzzle no student ever had. If he admitted it was her own theorem in disguise, he'd have to confess to intellectual theft. Instead, he chose silence. A soft academic violence far more effective than outright rejection. But silence doesn't mean absence. Trinity began noticing subtle shifts in how she was treated. Emails from professors arrived late, or not at all. Study groups disbanded when she tried to join. Library bookings she made were mysteriously overwritten. Small inconveniences, just enough to disturb her rhythm. Only one person acknowledged her directly, Dr. Beckett. She approached Trinity after a lecture on algebraic number theory. Her tone casual but eyes sharp. "I heard Cromwell gave you the old ghost puzzle," she said. Trinity nodded. "I solved it." Beckett tilted her head, studying her. "I know, and so does he." Trinity exhaled. "Why isn't anyone saying anything?" "Because they weren't supposed to," Beckett said. "That problem was a filter, a private joke. If a student of color got too close to it, they'd make it disappear. They didn't think you'd actually crack it. But I did." Beckett nodded. "Which makes you dangerous now." That word stuck to Trinity like frost. Dangerous. Not brilliant. Not gifted. Just a threat. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. Louder and blacker than they were comfortable with. Later that week, a formal letter appeared in her mailbox. A sealed envelope stamped with the university crest. Inside, a simple message: "Your current course selection is under review due to departmental restructuring. Please consult your academic advisor." It wasn't a punishment on paper, but it was one in practice. She marched to the advisory office, only to find the door locked during open hours. The secretary claimed there had been a scheduling error. No makeup appointment. No response to her emails. Her access to the math department server was suddenly revoked. Her project proposal vanished from the online portal. It was as if her presence, her brilliance, was being quietly erased. She called her mother that night. Tried to sound calm. "They're trying to shut me out," she whispered. "Then make it loud," her mother said. So she did. She printed her original proof, the one from Atlanta. She annotated the overlaps between that and the puzzle Cromwell had handed her. She attached screenshots, timestamps, and even a brief write-up explaining how the theorem evolved under her own mentorship. Then she left it all on Cromwell's desk. No note, no explanation, just the evidence. She didn't need to ask for justice. She demanded recognition. The next day, Cromwell canceled class. Not postponed, not rescheduled, canceled. Students were confused. The department offered no explanation. Rumors flew. Illness, travel, emergency. But Trinity knew the truth. The silence was cracking. Not publicly, not yet, but something was shifting beneath the floorboards of this ancient institution. She walked through the college courtyard that afternoon, with her head high. She wasn't invisible anymore, but not in the way they expected. She was visible because she forced their hand. Still, as she passed by the mathematics building, she noticed something that made her pause. A group of professors, 3 of them, stood huddled just beyond a glass window, speaking in low tones. One of them held the annotated proof she had submitted. The others were nodding, one shaking his head, and then laughing. She couldn't hear them, but their body language said enough. Trinity turned away, but just before she did, one of the professors looked directly at her, pointed through the glass, and mouthed something with chilling clarity. She didn't solve it. She stole it. For a moment, the only sound in the lecture hall was the rustle of papers and the low hum of the overhead lights. Trinity's fingers hovered over the edge of her desk, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Across from her, Professor Cromwell stood with the paper in his hand, her solution in his grip, and something unspoken between them suspended the air like a snapped violin string. His eyes scanned the proof, and even though his mouth remained flat, something in his posture shifted. His shoulders, always squared with unearned confidence, dipped just slightly. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitched, betraying the rigidity of a man used to control. The room around them was oblivious. A few students scrolled their phones. Others packed up their bags early, unaware they were sitting in the eye of a quiet storm. But Trinity saw it, felt it. The moment Cromwell reached the final line, the moment the logic wrapped into a full, clean circle. He blinked, not out of confusion but recognition. This was not just correct, it was elegant, beautiful, unassailable. And Trinity knew then, he had underestimated her. Worse, he had miscalculated the very thing he tried to manipulate. Without a word, Cromwell folded the paper. His movements were sharp now, almost mechanical. He tucked it into his satchel and turned back to the chalkboard. The lecture hadn't even started, but he placed the chalk down and faced the class. "That will be all for today," he said. His voice clipped. A few students exchanged confused looks. One raised a hand halfway in protest, but Cromwell was already moving toward the exit. "Lecture postponed," he added. "Check your portal for updates." He walked out, leaving behind confusion, silence, and the soft echo of Trinity's breath in the front row. Her pencil rolled off her desk and clattered to the floor. No one picked it up. She remained seated long after the room emptied. The euphoria of solving the puzzle didn't come. No rush of pride, no whispers of admiration from her peers. Just an eerie, hollow quiet, one that felt less like achievement and more like the opening of a trapdoor. What had she just done? Outside, the day was colder than usual. Wind curled around the stone buildings and swept through the narrow alleyways, like a rumor. Trinity walked with her coat zipped to her chin, her eyes low, avoiding glances from students whose smiles never quite reached their eyes. She passed Cromwell's office. The light inside dimmed. The door was shut. Dr. Beckett was the only one who reached out that day. Her message was short. Be cautious. Not quiet. Trinity didn't know what she meant. Not yet. By evening, something felt off. Her hallway, usually filled with laughter, music, and the scent of cheap noodles, was silent. Her dorm door was slightly ajar. Not enough to scream alarm, but enough to wrinkle the air with unease. She stepped inside. At first glance, nothing was missing. Her laptop sat on the desk. Books were where she left them. But something else clawed for her attention. The smell of Sharpie, permanent ink. She turned toward the far wall and froze. In thick, uneven strokes across her pale dorm wall were the words, "Affirmative action mistake." Her breath caught. Her pulse kicked. The ink was fresh, still glistening under the weak overhead light. The message wasn't just cruel. It was calculated, chosen to stab deeper than any insult. Not just calling her unworthy, but suggesting she had stolen a seat from someone more deserving. She stepped closer, stomach twisting. Her hands shook, not out of fear but fury. She'd worked twice as hard to get here, passed every metric, scored in the top percentile. And yet, to them, her presence was theft. Her intelligence, fraud. Her excellence, suspicious. No broken glass. No forced entry. Just a wordless invasion, designed to make her feel like a trespasser in her own space. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Then another. But as her fingers hovered over the contact for campus security, she stopped. Something in her gut tightened. What would they do? Investigate? Or file it as a non-criminal bias incident? Would they repaint the wall? Issue a gentle reminder about inclusivity? Would they believe her? She deleted the draft report and called Beckett instead. The professor answered on the second ring. Trinity? They were in my room, she said, her voice low and tight. They left a message. A pause. Are you okay? No, but I will be. I'm coming over. By the time Beckett arrived, the ink had dried. She examined the wall without speaking, then turned to Trinity with eyes that burned not just with sympathy but with a quiet, lethal kind of anger. You need to report this, Beckett said. To who? Trinity asked. The same people who've been trying to push me out since orientation? Beckett's lips thinned. I'll file it myself. Trinity leaned against the wall, arms folded tightly. Do you think Cromwell did it? Beckett hesitated. No. But someone in his shadow did. He doesn't need to lift the pen, just point. That hit harder than Trinity expected. Because it was true. People like Cromwell rarely got their hands dirty. They didn't need to. Their influence did the damage for them. All it took was a glance, a whisper, a laugh at the right moment. And the machinery around them, other students, faculty, the system would execute the rest. By morning the graffiti was gone, painted over in sterile beige. No trace, no investigation, just a polite email from administration that read, "We regret the incident and are committed to fostering a safe, inclusive environment." Trinity didn't reply. Instead, she kept going. Attended every lecture, submitted every assignment. She made sure her work was airtight, flawless, undeniable. She forced her name into academic conversations where it wasn't welcome. She became harder to ignore, but she also became lonelier. Her classmates no longer made eye contact. Group chats excluded her. Discussions ended when she entered the room. She was present, but only as an inconvenience. One afternoon, she logged into the internal Cambridge academic system to submit a research abstract, and found her access revoked. An error message blinked. User privileges restricted. Contact administrator, she called it. They told her the math department had flagged her profile for review. Review of what? No one could say. Emails to Cromwell went unanswered. The department had ignored her. Beckett, though furious, could only escalate so much before being shut out herself. And that's when the whispers started. She's not that smart. She stole the proof. Cromwell was humiliated. He has to defend his reputation. She's writing diversity points. She's threatening legal action just to stay enrolled. The rumors weren't loud. They were surgical, delivered in low tones in hallways, in passive-aggressive comments during seminars, in silence that followed her wherever she went. And yet, no one said anything to her face. Except one person. A student named Elijah Maddox, second-year physics major, approached her in the quad. You really solved that thing, didn't you? He asked. She nodded, unsure whether this was support or sabotage. Elijah hesitated, then said quietly, Cromwell gave that to a student last year. Same puzzle, same setup. He flunked him after midterms, said he lacked theoretical imagination. Kid dropped out. What was his name? Trinity asked. Ezra Daniels, Elijah replied. I don't think he ever came back. Trinity's breath slowed. Someone else had been given the same test. Someone else had fallen. She wasn't the first target. She might just be the first survivor. Later that night, Trinity received an anonymous message in her student inbox. No subject, no signature, just 6 words. You're next. We don't forget. It started with small shifts, minor, almost invisible. A professor who once smiled now kept his eyes glued to his notes when Trinity entered. A librarian who used to greet her by name suddenly asked for her ID every time she checked out a book. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and the warmth that had once barely kept her afloat had been drained from the building's veins. Trinity noticed it first in the cafeteria line. A girl she'd shared a study group with, just the week before, suddenly pretended not to see her. When Trinity said hello, the girl froze. offered a weak smile, and turned away. Later that day, Trinity overheard her whispering in the courtyard. She cheated. You know, on that Cromwell thing, I heard someone else wrote it for her. Trinity didn't react, not outwardly. But something in her stomach coiled. The story had mutated, twisted into something ugly. At first, she thought it was isolated. Maybe a couple of jealous students. Maybe resentment. But then she saw the signs multiply, one by one. In the library, she reached for a book on topology and found a sticky note tucked inside. Nice try, fraud. In the study lounge, someone had drawn a crude caricature of her on the whiteboard. Braids exaggerated, lips drawn grotesquely large, eyes crossed with the caption, "Cambridge's diversity darling." She erased it before anyone else could see. But the sting lingered. Even in class, the tone had shifted. Students who once laughed at her jokes now avoided sitting near her. When she raised her hand, professors paused longer than necessary, often moving on for time. A few even cut her off mid-sentence, something they never did to others. The worst came from faculty. Professor Langley, a stoic man who once invited her to join a research cohort, now addressed her in clipped tones. During a tutorial session, as Trinity presented a solution to a proof, he interrupted her halfway through. "Where did you get that methodology?" he asked, his voice heavy with accusation. Trinity blinked. "I built it off foundational work by Dr. Krantz. Cited properly, I hope." "Yes. And you're certain it's original thought?" She swallowed hard. "I wouldn't submit it if it weren't." He gave a curt nod and moved on, but the message was clear. Even the department secretary, who once helped Trinity find a misplaced form with a smile, now seemed to glance through her. Once, when Trinity asked about a scheduling conflict, the woman leaned in and said, too casually, "You might want to get everything in order. Word is your scholarship's under review." Trinity froze. "What review?" The secretary shrugged, tapping her keyboard. "Just passing along what I heard." But that was the thing about Cambridge. Nothing was ever said directly. No emails, no official complaints. Just whispers, half-truths, and shadows shaped like truth. Beckett tried to intervene. She met Trinity in her office one evening, eyes tired, lips pressed tight. "They're circling," she said. "I've seen this before. They're saying I cheated." "I know. And they're saying my scholarship is safe," Beckett said firmly. "For now. But this is how they do it. Not through confrontation. Through corrosion." Trinity looked out the window at the darkened courtyard. "So they'll make me feel so unwelcome. I leave on my own?" "Yes," Beckett said. "They want the story to end quietly." Trinity exhaled. "Then we won't give them silence." But silence found her anyway. Her inbox filled with late responses, cancelled meetings, accidental drops from group project threads. Her academic advisor stopped replying altogether. At one point, she found herself accidentally unenrolled from a core class, only to be told, "Oh, must have been a glitch." Glitches. Oversights. Miscommunications. Cambridge didn't use weapons. It used erosion. And then came the group chat. Trinity had been walking to a tutorial one afternoon when she realized she'd left her annotated proof notes in the basement. Printing lab. A quiet, often forgotten corner of the mathematics building. She rushed downstairs, past the rusting radiator and dim lights, and into the narrow room. As she entered, she heard the whir of a printer and the low buzz of an open laptop. Unattended on the corner desk. No one else was in sight. Her notes were there, neatly stacked. But as she grabbed them, her eyes drifted to the laptop screen. She froze. An email thread was open. Not from a student account, but a faculty inbox. It wasn't an accident. The inbox was active, the chat panel minimized. Someone had stepped away, likely to the copy machine around the corner. Trinity glanced at the screen, ready to look away. But what she saw made her blood run cold. A faculty group chat. 10 professors. Some names she recognized. Cromwell's among them. The chat was titled, Mathematics Integrity Task Group. But the messages were nothing of the sort. One message read, "Still waiting on her to publish something actually original." Another, "She's weaponized victimhood. We gave her a stage, and now she wants the whole theater." Then, what's worse, her math or her martyr complex. And then from Cromwell himself, "No matter how loud she screams, proof isn't about passion, it's about pedigree." Trinity's breath hitched. She stepped back from the screen, her heart hammering. This wasn't an accident. This was strategy. A coordinated effort to discredit her. to rewrite her excellence as entitlement. Footsteps echoed around the corner. Trinity grabbed her papers and fled, not waiting to see who returned. Outside, the cold air bit harder than usual. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurt, but because crying would feel like surrender. Back in her room, she opened her laptop and began screenshotting everything she could remember from the chat. The usernames, the timestamps, the words burned into her mind. She started drafting an email to the dean, to the diversity office, to the press. But stop. Not yet. If she moved too fast, they'd bury it. Claim the chat was taken out of context. Say she'd hacked it. Twist the truth, like they always did. She needed more. She needed witnesses. Receipts. She needed to turn the whispers back on them. Her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. You were never supposed to see that. She stared at it for a long moment, then typed one word in reply. Too late. A minute later, her screen lit up with a new message from an anonymous source. You're not the first. Meet me tomorrow. Library archives. Noon. The next day arrived heavy, like the sky had overheard too much. The fog hung lower over Cambridge's rooftops, dulling the edges of the ancient stones, and cloaking the campus in an eerie quiet. Trinity walked quickly, heart hammering from the message she'd received the night before. You're not the first. Her footsteps echoed across the courtyard as she approached the library archive entrance, a place most students barely knew existed. The door creaked open. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly over rows of worn books and brittle manuscripts. It smelled like damp paper and forgotten time. At the far back corner, beside a tower of neglected boxes, stood a figure in a long coat, back turned, hands stuffed in their pockets. Trinity hesitated. You messaged me? The figure turned. It was Professor Beckett. Relief, but also confusion. You said meet me tomorrow? Beckett shook her head. That wasn't me. A beat. I got the same message. Trinity's stomach dropped. The coincidence too tight. Too staged. Beckett motioned her closer. Before anyone else gets here, you need to hear this, she said, voice lowered. Everything you are experiencing, the exclusion, the rumors, even the puzzle, it's not random. Trinity stepped forward, tension crackling in her chest. Then what is it? A pattern, Beckett said. A process. She pulled a file from her bag, dog-eared and thick. Inside were printouts, emails, internal memos, redacted forms. At the top, a header, cognitive assessment bias evaluation, minoritized cohort, confidential. Trinity stared at it. What is this? Beckett's voice hardened. It's an unofficial, undocumented study. Cromwell's brainchild, been running for years under different names. It's not sanctioned publicly, but it's tolerated privately. They choose 1 or 2 students every year, always minorities, always high-performing, and place them under exaggerated scrutiny. The goal? To create data, showing that diversity admissions lead disproportionate failure. Trinity's breath caught. They're trying to prove we're not fit to be here? Exactly. And worse, by creating conditions that make students fail. She flipped to a page marked 209. A name. Ezra Daniels. That name again, Trinity whispered. He was one of the first targets. Like you, he came in top of his class. Within 2 terms, they had him flagged for plagiarism, isolated by peers, stripped of funding, and dismissed voluntarily. Trinity stepped back. Her hands shook. They're trying to break me, she said. No, Beckett replied. They're trying to record you breaking, then cite it as a case study. Every part of Trinity's body screamed, not out of panic, but rage. She had fought too hard, survived too much, to become someone's skewed data point. Why hasn't anyone stopped it? Beckett sighed. Because the system protects itself. Because people like Cromwell have tenure, history, and influence. And because the university doesn't want to know. So they let him run human experiments? No paper trail, no signatures, just nudges, hurdles, setups. Then when the student cracks, they can say, see, we gave them the chance. They weren't ready. Trinity's voice sharpened. Why are you telling me this now? Because you've lasted longer than any of the others. And because you might be the one who turns it inside out. Beckett handed her a USB drive. This has more names, documents, a list of students who vanished mid-program. But if you go public, I won't wait. Trinity interrupted. This isn't just about me anymore. Beckett held up a hand. That's not what I meant. If you go public without protection, without planning, they'll bury it. Or worse, paint you as the manipulator. Trinity looked down at the drive. A single ounce of truth, but truth in the wrong hands, could be distorted into a weapon. You're saying I have to choose, she said slowly. Expose this and risk being silenced, or stay quiet and survive. Beckett's voice softened. I'm saying you need time. Allies. Evidence that even they can't twist. But while I wait, Trinity whispered, he's still running it. Beckett didn't deny it. They stood there in silence, surrounded by dusty shelves and history repeating itself. Then came the sound of footsteps. Quick. Purposeful. A student assistant entered, holding a note. Miss Myles? You've been summoned. By who? The dean's office. Trinity exchanged a glance with Beckett. Now, the assistant added. Her heart raced as she exited the archive, the USB hidden in her coat. The halls felt narrower, the air colder. The path to the dean's building stretched like a corridor of dread. Outside the office, the receptionist didn't even ask for her name. They're expecting you. She was led through polished doors, past photos of smiling alumni and plaques of donors, until she was seated in a room too clean to feel human. The dean sat at the far end, flanked by 2 other faculty members. Miss Myles, he said, folding his hands. Let's talk. His tone was even, courteous, but every word felt preloaded. We've received several concerns about your recent conduct, academic and behavioral. Trinity's brow furrowed. From who? Sources within the department. One of the others said. Faculty and students. And what exactly are the concerns? The dean's voice remained polished. Questions of authorship regarding submitted work. Classroom disruptions. Accusations of manipulation. Manipulation, she repeated. You mean existing loudly while black? A beat of silence. Miss Myles, we want to give you the opportunity to clarify these matters before they escalate. Trinity leaned forward. Are you accusing me of academic dishonesty? No one's accusing, the dean said carefully. We're simply reviewing.
Then where's the evidence?
Another pause. We're in the process of compiling concerns. In the meantime, we're recommending a temporary academic hold, a pause on coursework while the review is completed. A suspension. It's not disciplinary, he said. It's procedural. She stood. So you want me to disappear? Quietly, like the others. The 2 faculty flinched, but the dean didn't blink. You're welcome to file a formal response, but I suggest discretion. Making this public won't benefit anyone. Trinity's voice dropped. It might save the next student you try this on. The dean stood too. Taller, firmer. Cambridge has a reputation to protect. So do I, she said. As she left the room, her phone buzzed. Another anonymous message. They'll try to make you doubt the sky is blue. Hold your ground. Her grip tightened. Because now she knew. This wasn't about one puzzle, one proof, one professor. It was about a machine, oiled by prejudice, polished with prestige, and protected by silence. And someone, finally, was going to name it out loud. As Trinity stepped outside, a flash of red caught her eye. A sealed envelope lay on the steps beneath her bag. No return address, no name, just 5 typed words. This is just the beginning. The carpet in the dean's office was too soft, the kind that muffled everything. The tension in the air, the questions swelling in Trinity's chest, the ticking clock behind the polished oak desk. She sat upright, hands in her lap, breath measured, but her stomach coiled tight. 3 people sat across from her. The dean, Professor Reginald Cromwell, and a third man whose name she wasn't given, whose face was unfamiliar. He wore no badge, no academic robes, just a stiff gray suit and a clipboard he never looked up from. This isn't disciplinary, the dean said smoothly, almost rehearsed. It's a formal academic review. These things happen. Trinity's voice didn't waver. Based on what? The man in the suit cleared his throat. An anonymous submission, he said. A tip involving potential academic dishonesty tied to your 2nd semester logic paper. Cromwell remained quiet, watching her with narrowed eyes, arms crossed like he was already done. What kind of dishonesty, she asked. Because every citation in that paper is traceable and original. The dean tapped a file in front of him. We've received a flagged IP address from our server logs. The file submitted came from a location not consistent with your user profile. An external proxy. Trinity blinked. What location? Off campus. London. A public server. Her eyebrows pulled together. I've never submitted anything from London. I don't even leave campus. Cromwell finally spoke. Perhaps someone helped you. A collaborator. These things happen. Her jaw tightened. If this is about the logic paper, it's mine. I have the handwritten notes, the drafts, the source logs. But the submission didn't come from your IP, the man in the suit repeated. That discrepancy is the concern. Then check your logs for the original draft timestamp. They'll match my document history. There is also concern, Cromwell added, his tone deceptively casual, that your prior work has been above expectation. Trinity stared at him. You mean too good to be believable? No one corrected her. Silence stretched, thick as wet wool. Then Trinity reached into her bag. Slowly, carefully, her fingers curled around her phone. She unlocked it under the desk, turned on the voice recorder, and slid it into her coat pocket. If you have evidence, she said carefully, then show it. Because unless there's proof, what you're doing is character assassination. The dean's smile faded. We're not here to punish Miss Myles. We're here to maintain integrity. She leaned forward, voice steady. Then where's the academic integrity in reviewing a student based on anonymous complaints and unverifiable IP logs? The man in the suit stiffened. I'd like the name of this review committee, she said. I want to appeal through the formal academic board. The dean paused, then glanced at the gray-suited man. I'm afraid this process operates independently from the traditional appeals board, he said finally, due to the nature of the concerns. There's no documentation of this committee, Trinity said. I've checked. Cromwell shifted in his seat. The suit man looked down at his clipboard, but the tension in the room snapped. You're not supposed to know it exists, the man said quietly. There it was. A shadow tribunal. A mechanism designed to bypass policy under the guise of procedure. No accountability. No student advocates. Just whispers, claims, and administrative nods. You built a back door, Trinity said softly, so students like me wouldn't see you coming. The dean raised a hand. Let's not escalate this. You'll be allowed to continue coursework during the review, but your access will remain limited. You've already locked me out, she said. Temporarily, he corrected. Do I have a representative? No, said the man. This isn't a trial. But it looks like one, she shot back. Cromwell smirked. But the dean glanced away. You're not afraid I cheated, she said. You're afraid I'm better than you expected. Again, no one responded. Trinity stood slowly. I want this entire conversation on record. There are no official transcripts, the dean replied. Her phone buzzed slightly in her coat. Still recording, still catching every word. She looked at Cromwell one last time. That was when he muttered it. Low, barely audible, but caught perfectly by the mic in her pocket. She's too clever. That makes her dangerous. She froze. The room did too. He didn't look at her. He wasn't trying to intimidate. He was stating a fact. Cold, resigned, as if he was already planning what would come next. Trinity met his gaze. Then you'd better be prepared for dangerous. As she turned to leave, she passed by the man in the gray suit. He whispered something she couldn't quite hear. But she felt it. This wasn't a warning. It was war. She walked out, down the polished corridor, past walls lined with plaques, and portraits Munn, who'd written history without ever making room for people like her. At the end of the hallway, she stepped into the light. Her phone still buzzed. Her breathing returned to pace, but her mind raced. She had proof now. Not theory, not suspicion. Proof. They had said it out loud. She returned to her dorm and locked the door, downloaded the audio, saved it twice, once in the cloud, once on a private USB. She sent the file to Beckett with a short message. They said it. They really said it. Then she paused. They hadn't just said it. They had admitted it. This wasn't just about her academic standing. It was about keeping the narrative intact. A narrative where black brilliance was always a fluke, never a fact. Where institutional racism wore elbow patches and spoke in academic citations. Trinity stood at the mirror, looked at herself, eyes hard, shoulders straight, chin up. She would not vanish quietly. A knock came at her door. When she opened it, no one was there, just a sealed envelope on the floor. Inside, a printed photo of her walking out of the dean's office, with red ink across the bottom. Withdrawal, or we'll rewrite you. The red envelope burned in Trinity's coat pocket as she returned to her dorm. Its warning, this is just the beginning, lingered like smoke. She hadn't opened it yet. Not because she was afraid, but because she already knew what it meant. The wheels were in motion. She could feel the machinery now. ancient rusted, well-oiled by history and arrogance, grinding into place. By the time she reached her room, something had shifted. There was no more guessing, no more hoping for fairness. They had made their move. Now, it was her turn. She sat at her desk and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. She opened her hidden audio recorder, the same one she used during the meeting with the dean and the two anonymous committee members, and uploaded the full recording to a password-protected drive. The final 30 seconds were the sharpest. Cromwell's voice, low but crystal clear, "She's too clever. That makes her dangerous." The file title, Ghost Tribunal, Truth Behind the Review. Then she opened her email and attached it to someone who had always waited in the background. Dr. Maurice Allen, class of '91, founder of the Cambridge Black Alumni Circle, and now a high-ranking executive at an international media firm. Trinity typed just 4 words. "It's time. Please listen." Then she clicked send. For the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. By morning, it had already begun. She awoke to 38 unread messages, 12 missed calls, and a screen full of notifications. Her phone buzzed like it had a heartbeat. She sat up, bleary-eyed, and tapped her browser. Trending. Gene, Cambridge cover-up. Headline. Audio reveals secret academic tribunal targeting black prodigy. Clip. Professor admits she's too clever. Secret recording shocks academia. It had gone viral. Not just within Cambridge. Not just in academic circles. But everywhere. Black Twitter was ablaze. Influencers were posting emotional videos, stitching her name into hashtags, demanding resignations. Celebrities were retweeting the audio. Civil rights attorneys began offering free legal aid in the comment threads. And yet not everyone believed her. The backlash came fast. Dressed in intellectual clothing, think pieces flooded the internet, accusing her of manipulation. Commentators on news panels debated whether cultural overcorrection had finally gone too far. An op-ed in the Cambridge Gazette read, "Brilliance doesn't excuse drama. Are we rewarding emotional spectacle over academic integrity?" The same week, Cambridge issued a statement. Cold. Polished. Empty. The university takes all allegations seriously. We are investigating the matter and urge the public to refrain from assumptions. No names. No acknowledgement. Just bureaucracy disguised as concern. On campus, students walked by Trinity with new energy. Some whispered support. Others turned their backs. A few called her a liar. Even now, with the truth echoing online, the system around her twisted itself into denial. That afternoon, she tried logging into her student portal to submit an assignment. Access denied. Another attempt. User profile restricted pending administrative review. She went to the IT desk. The receptionist gave her a look. Equal parts pity and fear. "I'm sorry. There's a note on your profile. Direct authorization only. I can't override it." Trinity stepped back, a mix of anger and exhaustion washing over her. "So now I don't exist here either." The receptionist didn't respond. She walked out into the courtyard, her phone still buzzing in her pocket. Every few seconds, another notification, interviews, requests, praise, doubt, threats. A swirl of digital chaos wrapped around her name. That evening, she met with Beckett in a quiet cafe off campus. They sat in a corner booth, away from windows. "You need legal counsel," Beckett said, her tone urgent. "They're locking you out to trigger a non-compliance clause in your scholarship. If you miss one more submission, they can justify revoking it. Retroactive." Trinity nodded. "They're tightening the net." Beckett pushed a folder toward her. "This is everything I could gather. Internal emails, class rosters, anonymous reports. You're not the first target, but you're the first who might finish this fight." Trinity opened the folder. More names, more silence. Her voice dropped. "I didn't ask to be a symbol." "I know," Beckett said, "but you're becoming one." By the next morning, a new headline hit. Cambridge faculty group chat leaked, mocking black students' intelligence. Someone, no one knew who, had leaked screenshots from the secret thread. Trinity saw in the basement. Every cruel message, every mocking comment, even Cromwell's line about pedigree over passion. It was all public now. The university tried to stem the damage, but it was too late. Students began organizing protests. Alumni threatened to pull funding. A petition calling for Cromwell's resignation crossed 200,000 signatures within 24 hours. Trinity stayed quiet through it all. not out of fear, but because she was planning. Then came the email. Subject line: faculty briefing document. Internal circulation only. Sender: faculty admin at Cambridge. But it wasn't internal. Someone had BCC'd it to her. She opened the PDF. It was her entire academic file. Grades, notes, performance evaluations. Most of it accurate. But in the margin, comments unfiltered, anonymous, meant only for faculty eyes. And that's where the truth turned vicious. Scrawled next to her second semester math score. Gifted for her type. Clearly trained for testing, not original thinking. Next to her lab performance. Aggressive in discussion. Uses race as a shield. And worst of all, beside a comment from her philosophy of logic course. Quota fill. Scholarship mistake. Affirmative action at its ugliest. Her chest tightened. Her hands trembled. These weren't just whispers anymore. These were official records. Stained with racism. Shared by the very people trusted to measure her. She scrolled further, and stopped. A note added just 3 days ago. Social disruption level high. Risk of mobilization. Consider accelerated removal. They weren't just evaluating her performance. They were evaluating her threat. She printed the document. She saved it to 5 different drives. Then she emailed it to every legal contact who had reached out in the past 72 hours. No more waiting. No more surviving. It was time to confront. As she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't tweet or news headline. It was a voice message. From a private number. She pressed play. A male voice. Measured. Calm. British accent. Not Cromwell. But someone close. You think this will end in your favor? You're very clever, Miss Myles. But clever girls don't win against institutions. They disappear. The message ended. No name. No threat. Just certainty. But Trinity was no longer scared. She was ready. Minutes later, her phone pinged again. This time with a new email. No subject line. Only one attachment, a blurry photo of a university basement file box. Labeled Project Validity. 19. Underneath it, scrawled in marker, survivors. Morning. Trinity woke to find her university profile disabled. Her heart didn't race. It slowed. That kind of silence, the blank screen, the missing access, the closed digital door wasn't unfamiliar anymore. It was Cambridge's signature move, erasure by deletion. She didn't panic. She documented it. Screenshots of error messages, timestamps, the access revoked banner, the automated email that offered no appeal process, no explanation, just a final sentence. All records are under internal review. You are advised to suspend academic engagement until notified. It was happening again. The same process Ezra, Arlo, Amina, and countless others had endured, wrapped in bureaucracy, sanitized by protocol, and executed without a trace of violence. But this time, Trinity was ready. Because that same morning, a whistleblower uploaded the faculty group chat to a public archive. Every word, every thread, every message from Cromwell and his colleagues, mocking Trinity's intelligence, strategizing how to discredit her, referring to her as the outlier, the weaponized quota, and a performance not a person. The digital lynch mob had finally shown its face. By noon, the archive had over 2 million views. Screenshots flooded social media. Students printed them and taped them across faculty doors. Cambridge's official Twitter account locked its replies. One particular thread, dated just days before Trinity's audio leak, sparked national outrage. Professor Langley. If she won't fold, we'll fold her story first. Cromwell. Don't underestimate noise. If she keeps making it, we can drown her in doubt. Unnamed user. Delete her from the system, and let the silence do the rest. News anchors used the phrase in headlines. Silence by system. How Cambridge deletes Black brilliance. The Black Alumni Circle issued a formal statement condemning the university's actions, followed by an emergency conference streamed live from London. We believed Cambridge was a place of learning, not sabotage, said Dr. Maurice Allen. But these emails reveal something darker, an institutional fear of Black excellence, dressed up as academic protocol. Under pressure, the university could no longer sit on its hands. A panel was announced, public, recorded, and hastily constructed. Trinity was summoned to appear before it. But in a cruel twist, the chair of the panel was none other than Professor Naomi Chadwell, one of the very academics whose name had appeared in the leaked group chat. Beckett pulled Trinity aside before the hearing. They're not trying to hear your side, she warned. They're trying to script your fall, Liv. Trinity nodded. Then I'll break their script. The hearing was held in a polished boardroom, lined with portraits of former provosts. All white, all male. Cameras were positioned at both ends. Live streams were active. Reporters tuned in across 3 continents. And at the center of it all sat Trinity, 21 years old, framed as a threat to a centuries-old empire. Professor Chadwell opened the session with the thin veneer of impartiality. This is not a trial, she said, but an examination of behavior, conduct, and institutional processes. Trinity stared back. You mean my behavior? My conduct? Chadwell smiled politely. We're here to understand the full picture. That picture began with a slideshow of her grades, submitted papers, screenshots of discussion boards, scrutinized not for plagiarism but for tone, interpretation, audacity. She was asked to justify her use of certain metaphors, to explain why she cited contemporary scholars alongside classical ones. One professor accused her of using emotional leverage in academic writing. She countered every accusation with poise and receipts, every citation, every timestamp, every note of original work. But they kept pressing. Then the subject turned to the now infamous Cromwell puzzle. Chadwell folded her hands. It has come to our attention that the mathematical proof you submitted bore resemblance to prior, unresolved models. How do you explain the speed and certainty with which you completed it? Trinity leaned forward. Because it wasn't unfamiliar. Cromwell repackaged my own previously published work. I solved it once, and he didn't expect me to recognize it. That wasn't a challenge. That was theft disguised as a dare. Gasps rippled across the audience watching online. Chadwell's expression didn't change. Trinity continued. Let's be honest. This isn't about the puzzle. It's about what happens when someone like me solves it. Beckett sat behind her, arms crossed, eyes burning into every panelist. Still the questions continued. Coded, loaded, and subtly racist. Do you believe you've been treated differently due to your identity? Would you agree that your outspokenness has made objective evaluation difficult? Do you accept any responsibility for the hostile atmosphere now present in the department? She answered them all, calmly, intelligently, but with fire behind her restraint. Then Chadwell gestured toward the audience. We'll now open the floor to witness statements. A few faculty spoke in polished defenses of protocol. A student defended Trinity. Another tried to downplay the group chat as dark humor among stressed academics. And then a new voice spoke. From the back, I have something to say. A figure stood, hood up, hesitant steps. A young man, the microphone crackled as he walked forward. Chadwell adjusted her glasses. And you are? He removed the hood. Bryce Nathaniel, he said, class of 2022. Or I would have been, if I hadn't been pushed out. The room tensed. Chadwell narrowed her eyes. You were not on the witness list. I know, Bryce said. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. He turned to Trinity. I know what they did to you, because they did it to me too. They said I lacked subtlety in my writing, that I was too argumentative. They flagged my work as inconsistent, even when I handed in the same thing as my white classmates. Cromwell told me I should find pride in being average. He paused, shaking. I stopped going to class. I stopped eating. I failed a course. I never missed. Then they told me I wasn't a fit for the environment, and maybe it was time to recalibrate my expectations. So I left, not because I wasn't good enough, but because they needed me to believe I wasn't. Silence. Deafening. Trinity's throat tightened. This was what the system feared. Survivors finding each other. Bryce looked around the room. You say this isn't a trial, but for people like me, it always is. From the first day, and we don't even know we're defendants until it's too late. He walked off. No applause. Just breathless stillness. Professor Chadwell looked rattled. And for the first time, the performance cracked. Beckett stood, addressing the panel. You claim to be reviewing a student. What you're really doing is defending a legacy. One that needs to be torn down if this university wants to have a future. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Something had changed in the air. The old power wasn't gone, but it was wobbling. Just as the panel prepared to adjourn, a clerk entered with a sealed folder, eyes wide. She handed it to Chadwell. Chadwell opened it, stiffened, then looked at Trinity with sudden disbelief. Inside the folder, a resignation letter. Professor Reginald Cromwell. Effective immediately. But beneath it, a legal document, marked confidential, filed not by Trinity, not by Beckett, but by someone listed only as AB, former student, witness enclosed. Arlo Bennett was no ghost after all. It was one thing to suspect a system was broken. It was another to see the blueprint in your hands. Trinity had read the buried reports twice, then a third time, barely breathing. Each page in the archive bled with quiet devastation. Black, brown, and working-class students, whose names had been carefully removed from the institution's visible history. They were brilliant, they were targeted, and then they were gone. But none of their stories were as urgent, as raw, or as terrifyingly familiar as the voice she was about to hear again. Ezra Daniels. She met him in a discreet student support office tucked behind a cluster of administrative buildings. The receptionist was new, unaware that the space had once been used for international student orientation, before budget cuts turned it into a forgotten corner. Fitting, Trinity thought, that erasure always started with the space you were allowed to occupy. Ezra entered without fanfare, wearing a faded University of Cambridge hoodie that looked more like armor than nostalgia. His face carried a subtle defiance, but his eyes gave away the exhaustion underneath. "I thought I imagined it," he said after they shook hands and sat down. "For the longest time I believed I was the problem. They made me believe it." "You weren't," Trinity said softly. "They made you a case study." He nodded like he already knew. "Cromwell watched me solve a boundary value problem in front of a class. The next week, he gave me something that wasn't solvable. I didn't know it then. I thought I was slipping." Trinity's spine straightened. "He did the same to me. Repackaged a puzzle from my own published work and made it look like I'd stolen it." Ezra exhaled slowly. "He calls it a filter. I heard him once. Said it was a way to test who was gifted, and who was just groomed by quotas." That word again, quota. The term used by those who pretend merit is colorblind, while wielding their privilege like currency. "He told me I lacked the Cambridge mind," Ezra added, his voice catching. "He said I was mechanical, that I didn't have instinct, that I was trained to repeat, not to think." Trinity clenched her hands together. "And then what happened?" "Once the whispers started, I couldn't escape them. My group dropped me from a key research project. The IT department flagged my login for suspicious activity. Except it wasn't mine. It mirrored my ID, but the submissions came from a location in a different city. Sound familiar?"
It was the same digital trap they had used on her.
Trinity nodded. "They wanted to plant doubt. Not just in others but in you." Ezra looked away for a moment. "I had dreams of teaching here one day, of mentoring students like me. But they didn't just push me out. They made me believe I wasn't worth staying." His voice broke there, just for a second. Trinity's eyes burned, but she held them steady. "You weren't the only one," she said. "They've been doing this for decades." She showed him the archive, dozens of complaints, many unsigned, many dismissed as resolved with no follow-up. Some so old they were scanned in by hand, yellowed edges visible on the screen. They sat in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of names no longer spoken. Then something shifted. Trinity searched one name again. Arlo Bennett. She pulled up his file from the Legacy Archive. Filed 2011. Resolved 2012. Lawsuit noted. Outcome sealed. Ezra leaned over her shoulder. "I remember him.
You knew him.
Only by name. He was a legend in first-year circles. Solved a problem they said couldn't be touched. Then, one term later, he was just gone. Any idea where he went?" "No. Just that he filed something huge. Word was he was planning to expose the whole faculty board." Then silence. Trinity scrolled deeper. The lawsuit trail went cold. No verdicts. No settlements. The only note was sealed under confidentiality and redacted. His personal website had been scrubbed. Social media wiped. No digital footprint passed. Ezra leaned in. "You think they erased him? Maybe not legally, but socially? Academically? Definitely." Ezra's voice darkened. "He tried to use their own system against them, and they buried him in it." That night, Trinity couldn't sleep. She stayed up rereading every Bennett file, every line of passive sabotage disguised as policy. Then she did something she hadn't dared before. She reached out to the wider Cambridge community. Using an encrypted email address, she sent a call out through the Black Alumni Network. A single question: "Were you ever made to feel too smart to be trusted at Cambridge?" Within 48 hours, the responses flooded in. A student from 1998 said his dissertation was delayed repeatedly after a white peer accused him of being too assertive. A woman who studied law in 2005 described how her professor mocked her accent during a moot court. A Nigerian-born physics graduate explained how his scholarship was revoked after a statistical anomaly appeared in his academic records, one he could never trace. The details differed, but the rhythm was the same: silence, shame, exit, erasure, and then one name reappeared: Arlo Bennett. A woman named Renee, an alumna from 2010, responded to Trinity's call-out with a chilling message. Arlo never vanished. He left, but not willingly, and not quietly. Trinity replied immediately. Renee explained they had been in the same student union. Arlo had shown her drafts of a white paper he was compiling, part math, part sociology, part institutional critique. It was bold, dangerous, and undeniable. He called it the intelligence filter. Said he'd traced a pattern of how top black and working-class students were tested harder, given worse resources, and framed as volatile when they questioned authority. Trinity's pulse pounded. Did he finish it? She asked. Renee paused. He never published it. But the last time I saw him, he told me he hid a copy in the Cambridge Law Library archives between two books on structural inequality. Said if anything happened, it'd outlive him. That night, Trinity went searching. She moved quietly through the library's basement stacks, torchlight in hand, the shelves looming like gravestones. Section Legal Theory. Shelf, Social Equity. Books, Institutional Bias in Academic Law. Structural Barriers in Post-Colonial Education. There, tucked between two dust-covered volumes, was a slim black binder. No title. No markings. She opened it slowly. Inside, a printed manuscript. The Intelligence Filter. A case study in systemic disqualification at Cambridge. Arlo Bennett. She scanned the first few pages. Data, charts, timelines. He had documented everything. With precision. Names redacted for protection. But the patterns were indisputable. One paragraph stood out. The brilliance of black students is not invisible. It is seen but as a threat, not a triumph. They don't want us to fail. They want us to exhaust ourselves, trying to prove we belong, and then walk away from the damage they claim they didn't cause. Trinity pressed her hand to the page. Arlo hadn't vanished. He'd told the truth, and then disappeared under the weight of it. But not anymore. She copied the manuscript, photographed each page, then resealed the binder and put it back. Let it remain a time capsule for the next student, the next survivor. As she uploaded Arlo's paper to her secure drive, a system alert flashed across her screen. Your user profile has been permanently disabled. University access revoked. Contact the dean's office. And then her screen went black. In the hours after Cromwell's resignation letter was handed over, a strange hush fell across campus. Not the usual Cambridge quiet, the scholarly hum, the distant footfalls in cobblestone courtyards, but something cold, like the walls themselves had overheard the truth, and were waiting for what came next. Trinity didn't waste the moment. She, Ezra, and Beckett regrouped in Beckett's home office, surrounded by towers of hard drives, folders with brittle edges, and encrypted flash drives pulled from years of institutional oversight. The files weren't hidden. They were buried deep within the university's archives, under names like student climate reflections, peer adjustment reports, or behavioral metrics. Bureaucratic camouflage. But once you knew what to look for, the trail screamed. We found 63 cases in the last 30 years. Ezra said, his voice low but shaking with conviction. All involving students of color, all with sudden academic declines after outperforming expectations in a high-stakes assessment. Trinity stared at the spreadsheet they'd assembled, each row a scar. A black chemistry major, who was told her lab work was too advanced to be original. A biracial philosophy student flagged for aggression after challenging a flawed exam question. A South Asian computer science candidate whose thesis disappeared after reaching the review board. But one name repeated more than any other. Cromwell, our reviewer. His signature appeared under internal memos, email approvals, and faculty summaries. Every single time a student of color had a breakthrough moment, solving a challenge, winning a competition, innovating in their field, Cromwell was involved in the aftermath. And the aftermath was always the same. A quiet review, a sudden setback, a slow collapse. This isn't negligence, Beckett said. It's sabotage institutionalized. Ezra scrolled down to the earliest case they'd confirmed. 1989. A Nigerian economics student submitted a radical new fiscal model during his second term. Cromwell, then just a junior fellow, wrote an anonymous rebuttal that labeled the model theoretical fantasy, discrediting it in front of the department. The student dropped out weeks later. It kept happening. Year after year, generation after generation. Until Trinity. Trinity, who hadn't walked away, who hadn't swallowed it, who refused to be erased. Why didn't anyone connect this before? Ezra asked. Beckett's face darkened, because they made sure the dots never touched. Different departments. Vague language. Off-the-record conversations. Closed-door meetings. They kept the damage siloed. Trinity murmured. But now we've centralized it. They called it what it was, a pattern of racially coded attrition. A system of intellectual gaslighting, designed to push promising minority students into academic no man's land, until they self-selected out. And now, with the panel hearing public, the leaked chat messages viral, and Arlo Bennett's manuscript beginning to circulate on private networks, they had something else too. Leverage. Trinity pulled out the printout from the black binder Arlo had left behind. She placed it on the table. We publish this, she said, and we attach it to the spreadsheet. Names redacted where necessary, but not his. Not anymore. Ezra hesitated. They'll say it's fabricated. That's why we'll include timestamps, file origins, citations. This isn't just a call-out, Trinity said. It's a map, a forensic dissection of institutional racism, dressed in policy, papered in politeness. They worked until dawn, compiling everything. Trinity crafted a foreword, one that didn't beg for sympathy, but demanded accountability. Cambridge is not broken. It is functioning precisely as it was designed, where excellence is not rewarded, but policed when it doesn't come in the right color. They titled the document, The Pattern That Could End Careers. It was time. But just as they prepared to release the report first to the alumni circle, then the press, Trinity received an email. No subject, no name, just a download link, and a single line. Before you publish, read this. Beckett scanned it for malware. It was clean. Ezra decrypted it. What opened was a PDF scan from what appeared to be an old faculty newsletter. Dated. Inside, a congratulatory blurb about a mathematics competition hosted at Cambridge that year. The name of the winner? Jerome Alton, a young Black American student on a one-year academic exchange, age 19, hailing from Chicago. The reason for his recognition: he had solved the unsolvable, a puzzle crafted by a senior faculty member, a complex theorem disguised as a challenge. The newsletter called it the Cromwell Conundrum. Trinity's blood went cold. She read the next few lines. Alton's solution stunned faculty members across departments. His ability to unpack the layered logic surpassed expectations. But then came the turn. A week later, Jerome Alton was removed from the university's online student registry. The competition was removed from the annual report. And the Cromwell Conundrum, never mentioned again. Trinity sat back, heart pounding. He solved it, she whispered. Ezra blinked. Someone solved the puzzle before you? No, she corrected. They just made sure no one knew. She searched Jerome Alton's name online. Almost nothing came up. A local Chicago newspaper article about a scholarship win. An academic mention in a 2006 community newsletter. Then silence. Vanished. Just like Arlo. She turned to Beckett. Why would they acknowledge him once, and then delete him? Beckett frowned. Maybe they didn't think anyone would care. Or maybe they hadn't expected another to solve it after him. Maybe Cromwell thought the shame had been buried deep enough, long enough. But Trinity's existence had unearthed it. She wasn't the first to solve it. She was the first they let be seen. Moments later, Trinity's phone buzzed again. A new message. Unknown number. A voice memo this time. She pressed play. It was a young man's voice, crisp, American, faint but unmistakable. Trinity, if you're hearing this, then you know. They buried me, but I documented everything. The proof, the original proof, is hidden, and I left it where only another solver would look. The voice memo from Jerome Alton still echoed in Trinity's ears as the headlines broke worldwide. It began slowly, with murmurs in academic newsletters, then accelerated like a storm barreling through the gates of denial. By midweek, global news outlets were calling it a scandal. By Friday, it had become something more, a reckoning. Cambridge accused of silencing Black brilliance. 30-year pattern exposed. The puzzle, the proof, and the purge. One student's fight against academic racism. Cromwell resigns amidst allegations of targeting minority geniuses. Trinity's name was everywhere. Some treated her as a martyr. Others, a symbol. A few reduced her to a case study. But what none could do anymore was ignore her. Public pressure mounted like a vice grip on the university's centuries-old calm. Cambridge responded, as expected, with precision-crafted non-commitment. The university takes these matters seriously. We are investigating concerns raised and remain committed to inclusivity. No name, no consequences. Just a statement with enough air between the words to suffocate. But this time, the public didn't settle for silence. Within days, student protests erupted across the university's historic grounds. They weren't loud at first, just small groups with posters outside the mathematics building. Then came the teach-ins, the midnight candlelight vigils, the coordinated social media strikes. Students scrawled, "We are not outliers," on chalkboards across campus. Others posted mock puzzles taped to professors' doors with the phrase, "Only solvable if you're the right color." When black faculty began resigning, quietly, then in waves, donors started calling. One by one, endowments were frozen. Departments received warning letters from major sponsors demanding transparent reform. A prestigious tech firm pulled funding from the Applied Logic Center. Pressure was no longer internal. It was existential. Behind closed doors, the administration scrambled. Meetings stretched late into the night. Damage control consultants were flown in. Emails flew back and forth between legal teams, communications officers, and trustees. How to stop the bleeding. And in the center of the storm was Trinity Myles. She refused interviews at first. She watched, listened, read the contradictions. Some called her brilliant. Others accused her of weaponizing identity. A columnist in a right-wing tabloid referred to her as a social arsonist. Another in a liberal journal called her the canary in the ivory coal mine. But Trinity wasn't interested in being anyone's metaphor. She was building a case. She met with lawyers, gathered every message, every leaked chat, every IP record. She had data, documents, Arlo's manuscript, and now Jerome Alton's voice. Still, Cambridge didn't fold. Instead, they offered her a private meeting. She was escorted to a discreet conference room on the edge of campus. No media, no cameras, just two senior university officials, one human resources liaison, and a man in a Navy suit from the legal department. The offer came without shame. "We'd like to extend our apologies, Miss Myles," the HR rep said, sliding a formal letter across the table. "What you've experienced, we deeply regret any miscommunication or mishandling. No acknowledgement of sabotage. No mention of Cromwell, of the fake committee, of the racist remarks in the official faculty chat. Just regret for miscommunication. And we believe it's in your best interest to continue your studies in a setting that honors your potential," the man in the Navy suit added. "We've made arrangements for a transfer." Trinity stared at the letter. It was diplomatic, polished, poisoned. "A transfer," she repeated. "To Oxford," the HR rep said. "Full scholarship, clean academic slate, complete credit transfer, immediate enrollment." "And what happens to the investigation?" The lawyer's smile faltered. "We believe this arrangement resolves the matter fairly." Fairly. Not just to make her go away, but to make her vanish on their terms. "You want me gone, but safely. So the headlines stop. It allows everyone to move forward," he said. "You maintain your future. We protect the university's standing. But what about the ones before me? The ones you erased?" Silence. No one answered. Trinity stood, slowly, the letter still resting untouched on the table. "You don't want resolution," she said. "You want revision." The HR rep folded her hands. "Trinity, we believe this is your chance to return to peace." "Peace?" she said. "This university made war on my name." With that, she walked out. No transfer, no hush, just truth. And the storm behind her. Within 24 hours, she issued her own statement, posted publicly to her personal site. "I was offered a transfer. I declined, because I refused to let this institution sweep another body under its marble floors. I am not withdrawing. I am filing suit." It landed like a thunderclap. She filed the lawsuit under the UK Equality Act and human rights legislation. The charges included racial discrimination, academic sabotage, emotional damage, hostile learning environment, and institutional misconduct. But the core of the complaint was philosophical. "This is not just about what was done to me. It is about a system that punishes excellence when it refuses to come in expected packaging." The media turned sharply. International law scholars weighed in. Former students came forward in support, attaching their names for the first time. And then unexpectedly, a counter-narrative emerged. An op-ed in the Times from a former Cambridge administrator read, "The Myles lawsuit isn't new. It's just finally visible." It exposed what had long been whispered, that the university had repeatedly settled discrimination claims with non-disclosure clauses. That entire departments had shadow lists of high-risk admits. That Cromwell's actions weren't isolated, but mirrored by others too protected to name. Cambridge panicked. Not publicly, but structurally. Emails leaked showing internal crisis meetings. One read, "If she wins in court, we lose more than money. We lose myth." They tried to reach Trinity again, this time offering mediation, a televised apology, even a commemorative fellowship in her name. She didn't answer, because some truths weren't for sale. As her legal team finalized their court filing, a package arrived at her doorstep. No return label. Inside, a worn leather journal. On the first page, in slanted black ink, Jerome Alton, The Real Solution. The morning of the trial felt different. The halls outside the courtroom, polished marble floors, old portraits of long-dead scholars, ornate woodwork, hummed not with tradition, but with dread. For once the ivy-covered grandeur of the campus felt less like prestige, and more like a facade cracking under pressure. Trinity Myles pushed open the heavy courtroom door, flanked by her legal team, and paused. The room was cavernous, high-ceilinged, with rows of benches for observers, gallery seats for media, and at the front a long bench where judges and clerks sat beneath the crest of the university. On the plaintiff's side, Trinity's team had built a fortress of evidence: internal memos, archived complaints, whistleblower files, the black binder from the long-buried manuscript, and printed copies of the leaked faculty chat logs. On the defendant's side sat representatives of the institution, a wall of gray suits in steely calm. At the back, an open row of seats was reserved for former students who had agreed to testify. Some looked worn down. Others looked hopeful. Many carried the same wary posture, dignity battered by doubt, silence forced by fear. The prosecution, Trinity's lawyers, opened with a calm but forceful tone. They narrated a timeline, decades of subtle sabotage, institutional whispers, repeated patterns of excellence followed by erasure. They showed side-by-side comparisons, top-tier grades, scholarship renewals, glowing evaluations, abruptly terminated or tainted by vague accusations. For each student named, Black, South Asian, working class, international, they laid out a pattern consistent enough to suggest design rather than coincidence. One expert witness, a retired professor of educational sociology, took the stand. She described a phenomenon known in certain institutions as academic filtering, a covert mechanism to regulate diversity under the guise of meritocracy. She cited historical examples, statistical analyses, even psychological studies on how minority students are systematically marginalized through subtle obstacles, rather than overt discrimination. Her voice shook as she spoke of the emotional toll, but she remained composed. "This is not an isolated incident," she concluded. "It is structural, hidden by respectability and tradition." Then came the testimonies. One by one, former students stood up. A woman who had once come first in her class in algebra, after a regrading review, her grade dropped 2 full letters, without explanation. A South Asian man whose thesis advisor vanished shortly after he published promising preliminary results. A Jamaican-born woman, whose name had simply disappeared from the yearbook and the department register, as though she had never existed. Each story was different, but the scars were the same: confusion, betrayal, erasure. The courtroom whispered with disbelief. Even some of the media began shifting in their seats. The defense repeatedly tried to frame each case as an isolated misunderstanding, a procedural misstep, or the misfortune of a few lost stars. But the weight of accumulated stories piled up too fast. The transcripts, the archived complaints, the resubmitted grades, the abrupt visa cancellations, a mosaic of injustice too detailed to ignore. Then the defense asked for a break. The gallery emptied. Trinity stepped into the hallway and caught the eyes of the former students, faces marked by relief, by fear, by something like hope. None spoke, but in that look was a silent pact. They had started something bigger than their own pain. When court resumed, the defense began its counterattack. They tried to argue plaintiff bias, that Trinity's narrative was amplified by public pressure, that she was trying to turn a personal conflict into a systemic indictment. One lawyer claimed the faculty chat log could have been doctored, digital files are unreadable. Another argued that scholarship decisions are maintained at the department's discretion, No one can challenge them once they're editorially reviewed. Trinity's lead counsel nodded. We anticipated that, she said, and pointed to the printed memos, the USB drive of archive data, the black binder with the long-suppressed manuscript from the earlier exchange student, and dozens of emails from students who had vanished. This is not hearsay. This is documentation. This is history. A hush fell when the judge invited the first cross-examined plaintiff. The defense's lawyer asked a straightforward question. Why did you never speak up before? The woman, formerly top of her class, looked down at her notes, then up, her gaze steady. Because I thought I did it to myself. I believed they were right, that I was too emotional, too sensitive, too ambitious. There was a long silence. Then she added quietly, I stayed silent out of shame, because they made me feel guilty for existing. Trinity's chest tightened. Beckett, seated behind, tightened hers too. This was what the faculty and institution had depended on. Silence, shame, loneliness. The court reporter cleared her throat, then turned to the defense. They called their first key witness, none other than Professor Reginald Cromwell, the former titan of mathematics, stripped of public title, but not yet stripped of composure. He walked in slowly, eyes fixed ahead. Trinity didn't look away. Cromwell's presence filled the room with a static coldness, like a long frozen stone finally thawing in public light. The defense attorney asked polite, clinical questions. Professor, would you describe your role in admissions, scholarship renewals, and departmental reviews over the past 30 years? Cromwell paused, gazed distant for a second. Then, I was responsible for reviewing student work, ensuring academic standards, and recommending continuation based on performance. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, controlled. Professor, the lawyer continued, can you explain why in multiple cases, when students of color submitted original high-level work, including complex proofs, their scholarships were revoked, or their work flagged for irregularities? Cromwell adjusted his glasses, expression blank. I cannot comment on individual students. Standards apply to everyone. Occasionally, work may appear promising, but then independently fail to hold up under rigorous academic scrutiny. Trinity watched him, saw no remorse, no hesitation, only protocol, only preservation. But then came the flip. Under cross-examination, her attorney asked, have you ever given the same unsolvable problem to a student who successfully solved it? Cromwell's face tightened. The courtroom leaned forward. He looked at the judge, then at Trinity, and he said slowly, not to my knowledge. I consider that question outside the scope of this hearing. Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Some gasped. Others looked stunned. The defense lawyer attempted to steer back, but the damage was done. The veneer had cracked. Then, with the calm of someone delivering a verdict before it was read, Cromwell turned slightly toward Trinity, his lips curving in a slight, contemptuous smile, and he said, loud enough for the gallery to hear, she didn't belong here. A silence so heavy it pressed against the walls descended immediately. Trinity felt as though the static of years of hatred finally sliced the air. The judge's gavel remained unmoved. Cromwell sat back. The defense lawyer cleared his throat, shifting papers, but nothing could blur the moment. Her heart pounded. Beckett tightened her grip on the bench. The former students behind her leaned forward. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. In that silence, in that accusation, lay the truth. Not the twisted narrative of quota or diversity hire, but the fear in a man who realized brilliance doesn't bow to pedigree. Trinity rose, steady, quiet. She addressed the court, not with anger, but with finality. If you believe I didn't belong here, then this trial proves what I knew. I did, and because I did, I didn't stay silent. The judge cleared his throat, but before he could speak, the courthouse door at the back burst open. A figure stood in the threshold. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured, security tense. It was a woman, mid-30s, composed, determined. She walked toward the center aisle, handed a thick envelope to the bailiff. The room fell into confusion. The bailiff passed it up. The judge opened it. His eyes widened. The attorneys exchanged glances. Cromwell shifted, his face draining color. Inside the envelope, dozens of pages, signed affidavits from 20 former students, testimonials, transcripts, documented proof of incidents previously hidden from all departments. Not just mathematics, engineering, physics, philosophy, computer science. It was bigger than Trinity's case. It was a violation across the institution. And worse, it implicated not just professors, but administrators who approved every scholarship review and academic revocation. For the first time, the myth of neutral academia looked like a sham. As the courtroom erupted in whispers, the judge looked at Trinity and said softly, "This changes everything." Outside, a single reporter captured the moment, her mic live, her eyes blazing into the camera, and asked, "Is this the end of Cambridge as we know it?" Trinity only nodded, but inside her pocket, in a small folded piece of paper, was a name she had never heard spoken aloud in court. Jerome Alton, and a date, 2007. The stone steps of the courthouse courtyard were packed tight. On one side, banners painted in hand-lettered chalk. "Black brilliance is not a quota. Erase the silence." Cambridge 800 years, countless covers. Muffled chants rose like a tide, rattling through the ancient arches that had once only echoed privilege. On the other side, cameras and microphones, local news vans, international outlets, reporters sharpening notebooks, journalists clutched pens and pressed record buttons, as though they were archaeologists, uncovering centuries of secrets with every broadcast. Trinity Myles stood behind a cluster of protesters, hands clasped, heart hammering. She was glowing, pale in the twilight, courage under pressure. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy, saturated with the gravity of history bearing down. Portraits of men in powdered wigs glared from their frames, ancestors of a system built on legacy, lineage, exclusion. The gallery, previously filled with observers and press, was now a tapestry of solidarity. Former students, alumni, supporters from across the world. Many held small signs, others simply stared, their expressions grave. Trinity's legal team sat behind her, files stacked like armor, ready. On the plaintiff's side, this was no longer just a case, it was a reckoning. The judge entered, robes shifting, steps slow. In the hush, even breathing sounded loud. Trinity rose when instructed, voice calm but steady. She looked out over the crowd and began her closing testimony. She didn't plead. She didn't beg. She didn't cry at first. She started quiet. "I did not come to court to ask for sympathy. I came to ask for justice." Her voice carried the weight of every sleepless night, every erased file, every whispered slur disguised as administrative note. Because what I faced, what others faced, was not accident. It was policy. Quiet. Insidious. Design. She spoke of the hidden archive, the complaints buried under bland titles like student climate feedback. She spoke of the fake review committees, the erased files, the redacted lawsuits, the missing names. She recited numbers, 63 documented cases, spanning decades, more than 24 scholarship revocations, more than 10 students who vanished from registries within a term of successful breakthroughs. Her tone was calm, her logic precise, each accusation backed by documents, timestamps, internal memos, original proofs, even server logs showing suspicious proxy IP submissions. Then she raised her eyes and looked at the faces of former witnesses seated in the gallery. Those who had come back not for themselves, but to give voice to those who couldn't. She said, "They didn't fail because they were incapable. They failed because brilliance was a crime when it didn't come with privilege." The courtroom held a breath. Somewhere a pen stopped scratching. A camera frame froze. Only then did the tears come. Slow at first. A single drop, tracing down her cheek. Then another. But they didn't break her. They sharpened her. She wiped them once, squared her shoulders, and continued, "I walk out of here, not because I'm seeking destruction of a name, but restoration of truth. Because truth doesn't expire with silence." A murmur filled the room. Soft, then rising. Not arguments, not condemnation, but recognition. The kind that charges the air with electricity. Her words didn't demand pity. They demanded accountability. Outside, the protests swelled. University gates loaded with banners, voices echoing across the quad. The media fed on it, headlines cascading across global news feeds. The trial had become more than a legal battle. It was Cambridge's reckoning, a challenge to 800 years of polished stone, cloistered halls, and legacy protection. Back inside, after her closing statement, the defense rose for one final attempt, a posturing of institutional stability. They argued that the archived cases were administrative noise, not proof of systemic discrimination. They claimed errors happened, but those were isolated lapses. Human error, not design. They pleaded for continuity, for preservation of prestige, for calming of academic morale. But the courtroom felt too full now. Every former student present, every protester outside, every journalist recording, they were witness. Not just to a trial, but to a confession. The air crackled with history being rewritten. As closing arguments ended, the judge stood. The crowd leaned forward. Media light stilled for a moment, and the judge's voice, firm but softened by gravity, cut through. The jury will now deliberate. Trinity sank slightly into her seat. Relief, hope, exhaustion, an unsteady mixture. Her mind replayed the past weeks. The hidden archive, the black binder, the leaks, the resignations, the shockwaves. This was the final turn, but also the most vulnerable. Outside, a sudden shout rose, then another. The protesters surged forward, pressing their signs to the courtroom windows. Justice is overdue. Silence had a price. We saw you through the glass. Their faces pressed close. Young, old, black, brown, international, British. A tapestry of those forced into the shadows for daring to shine. Inside, police officers glanced nervously. Reporters scribbled frantically. A cameraman adjusted a lens. The judge called for order, banging his gavel, but the noise didn't die. It grew. The echoes of centuries being shaken, surfacing in chants, banners, defiance. For Trinity, every pulse, every breath, every thundering heartbeat was a promise, not just to herself, but to every erased name she now carried. The jury left the room. The doors closed. Silence settled again. Heavy, expectant, trembling. Hours passed. The clock on the wall ticked slow. Outside, the sun sank behind Gothic spires, painting the stone in gold and shadow. Reporters paced, petition counters climbed, protesters held vigil. Inside, the glow from courtroom screens cast hollow reflections on marbled floors. When the silence became too loud, the judge returned. His robe brushed the floor. Faces turned. Cameras zoomed. Every breath stilled. Trinity rose. The courtroom exhaled as one. But before the verdict was read, before justice, before relief, the bailiff opened a small envelope and handed it to the judge's clerk. The judge took the paper, unfolded it, gave a sharp glance to counsel, then back to Trinity. His face was unreadable. The light in the courtroom flickered, from stained glass windows to bare bulbs, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Trinity's heart hammered. Beckett's hand hovered near her notes. The former students in the gallery leaned forward, shadows across their faces. The judge cleared his throat. "Members of the jury," he began. Trinity inhaled. The hush swallowed her. Then he said, "We find..." Silence. Stretched. Outside, a reporter whispered into a live mic. "Has Cambridge finally fallen?" Trinity closed her eyes. The name on the envelope floated heavy. Jerome Alton, the ghost who had solved the puzzle nearly 2 decades ago. And now his legacy waited on a single word: guilty or not guilty. The verdict hung in the air, a single breath away. The courtroom waited. The air tasted of smoke-thick tension, as though the walls themselves held their breath for what would come. Outside, the crowd's chanting had paused, the protest just beyond the tall windows holding its own quiet vigil. Inside, every pair of eyes was fixed on the jury box, as though expecting the world itself to tilt when the foreperson spoke. For a long moment, no one stirred. Then the foreperson cleared their throat, shuffled papers, and read the verdict with a voice that seemed to echo in the bones of the building. On the count of systemic abuse, racial discrimination, and targeted academic sabotage, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Trinity Myles. Gasps burst in the courtroom, like released pressure, a fractured sound of relief, vindication, disbelief. For a second, no one moved. Then a wave hit Michael, her lead attorney, who closed his eyes and exhaled, as though letting go of all he had carried. Behind them the gallery erupted, former students embracing, reporters rising to their feet, cameras flashing as though recording lightning. Trinity's chest tightened, her face felt numb. She didn't know whether to cry or stay still. All she knew was that the silence had shattered. Minutes later, as she stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, the cheers hit her fully. Protesters pressed their signs skyward. "Justice is no longer quiet. They erased us, we returned." Faces she recognized from plaque-covered dorm walls, from archived complaints, from whispered stories long ago dismissed. All alive, all chanting her name. Trinity lifted her hand to the crowd. She wasn't a martyr. She was a student, but the victory felt heavier, older, larger than herself. Over the next 24 hours, the world caught fire. International headlines screamed, "Cambridge convicted, historic verdict over institutional racism." Editorials flooded in. Universities across Europe and North America responded publicly, pledging internal reviews. Boards of trustees at elite institutions released nervous statements. Old professors with pedigrees insecure as brittle parchment issued cautious condolences. Documentaries were green-lit. Podcasts dove deep into archived files, drawing maps of structural erasure. Meanwhile, inside the towers of Cambridge's administrative core, decisions cracked like ice under pressure. 2 members of the board, alumni linked to wealthy endowments, resigned. Dozens of faculty sent their letters of departure, some citing moral protest, others fear of implication. The mathematics department chair stepped down. A leading benefactor withdrew millions in funding. The Applied Logic Center's endowment was frozen. Donors demanded audits. Departments once thought untouchable became fragile. The university, long a monolith of tradition, buckled under scrutiny. Trinity received the settlement details through her lawyer's secure mailbox. A 6-figure sum for damages, full reinstatement of academic status, and a public apology drafted to appear in national newspapers. More importantly, an agreement for a UK-wide academic inquiry into systemic discrimination within Russell Group universities. Backed by independent oversight, the legal victory had physical weight. Policies to rewrite, names to reinstate, timelines to compensate. Change was no longer abstract. She didn't celebrate publicly. To her, it wasn't about the money. It was about closure, not just for herself, but for every erased name she carried in her memory. She slipped out the next morning before dawn, to the same dorm where it had started, emptied now by resignations and departures. She sat on the bed, the same bed where she'd pressed her ears to the wall at night, wondering if silence could kill someone slowly. She closed her eyes and exhaled. The victory felt strange, clean, official but heavy. Old scars ached new. Then came the letters. Emails from former classmates who had vanished from registries. "I'm coming back," some read. Others simple, "Thank you." One attachment bore the manuscript from a student expelled 12 years ago, now authenticated. Another carried a photo of a former lab group, young, focused, vibrant, with a note, "You vindicated us." Trinity archived each one. She built a folder deep within her encrypted drive, a digital monument. Names, dates, original proofs, correspondence, a growing pile of truth. For the first time, erasure had a counterbalance. Public appearances followed. She accepted interviews, not to revel, but to expose. On a live BBC program, she laid out the timeline. On a podcast, she spoke softly but clearly about the emotional toll, the isolation, the doubt, the guilt heaped upon brilliance when its face was black. She insisted the fight was not singular. She was not the only exception. She was the first survivor, and maybe, if she was lucky, not the last. Her voice resonated in lecture halls, community centers, and online forums. Students from across the UK and US reached out, sharing stories of academic sabotage, of doors quietly sliding shut, of opportunities quietly evaporating. Trinity read each message, saved each one. She became a living archive of survival. Yet through it all, she remembered why she started. Not for fame, not for retribution, but for truth. Months passed. Winter turned to early spring. The ancient stone of Cambridge glistened under rain and frost. New students arrived, naive perhaps. Some wore patches declaring solidarity. Some glanced at her with admiration. Many didn't know the history, only the headlines. Trinity returned to alignment. She signed a quiet lease off campus, working on a new project, a foundation for minority students in elite institutions, a network mentorship program, legal advocacy. She reached out to those who had disappeared, those who had been silenced. She built ladders where previously there were only knives. She rarely thought about returning to student life. She'd grown beyond those dorms, those halls. She'd become something else, a guardian of memory, a voice for erased brilliance. That identity settled like armor, heavier than metals, colder than institutional apology. Then one morning, as she sifted through mail at her rented flat in London, an envelope caught her eye. Sealed, cream-colored, heavy paper, bearing the old Cambridge crest in gold. the same that had stamped her dorm letter 8 years ago. But she didn't remember requesting anything. She paused before opening it, fingers locking around the seal, a flicker of dread passing through her chest. The postmark read, Cambridge University, Faculty Office, Cambridge UK. Inside was a single sheet, typed, formal, impersonal, in tone, though the gravity behind it felt anything but. Dear Miss Trinity Myles, in light of recent developments and the unanimous findings of the tribunal, and with support from the newly formed inquiry board, we would be honored to offer you a position on the faculty of the Department of Mathematics as a visiting lecturer beginning in the upcoming academic term. We believe your experience, brilliance, and resilience embody the values we now strive to uphold. Beneath the typed signature was a name she recognized. The interim dean, one appointed after the board shakeup. A name formerly unknown, cloaked in endless acting titles. The letter went on to outline salary, teaching load, research support, and assurances of a safe environment, with protective clauses for academic freedom and anti-discrimination oversight. Trinity reread the words. Her pulse quickened. Her mind raced through every memory. The puzzle, the walls with slurs, the letters erased, the threats, the hearings, the resignations, the global media storm. And now, this, an offer, from the same institution that had tried to erase her. Her stomach twisted. Was this reconciliation? A genuine admission? Or another trap? Polished, institutional, disguised as opportunity. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it into an envelope, with the word return scrawled across the front. But she didn't seal it. Outside, the London sky was gray, low, heavy, uncertain. The future felt wide open, dangerous, maybe salvageable, maybe not. She closed her eyes, because as the wheels turned again, in courts, in boardrooms, in halls of power, Trinity understood one thing. The real test wasn't this verdict. It wasn't even this letter. The real test was if institutions like Cambridge could change, or if they just changed their tactics. And right now, only one question burned in her mind. Should she go back and build from the inside? The corridors of the mathematics building felt different when Trinity walked them this time. The stones beneath her shoes were the same, cool, worn, polished by centuries of footsteps. But the air no longer weighed on her shoulders. The silence that had once felt oppressive, laced with whispers and judgment, now seemed empty, bare, vulnerable, but quiet at least. She paused at the door of the lecture hall, where it all began, where the first puzzle had been handed to her with a smirk, like a gauntlet cast down before an invisible jury. On the plaque outside, under the old brass lettering, she erased the name of the previous occupant, now retired, disgraced, gone, no longer teaching, no longer hiding behind tenure. The corridor had been cleaned of his dust, but not of his memory. In her hand was the puzzle itself. The same paper, yellowed at the edges, folded deep enough to hide its secrets. She slid it carefully from her folder, as though retrieving something alive, a wound healed but still bearing a scar. Her fingers grazed the folds, tracing the lines of logic, the variables, the layers of abstraction that once felt impossible. Now it felt like a relic, a warning, a promise. Down the hall, a young student waited. She couldn't be more than 19 or 20, her skin dark, her eyes bright but cautious. Trinity recognized the look immediately, the same mix of hope, ambition, and the quiet dread of not knowing if brilliance would be rewarded or questioned. "Good morning," Trinity said quietly. The student stood a bit straighter, quietly respectful. "Good morning, Professor Myles," she answered. Her voice carried a sheen of respect, and maybe a trace of relief. Trinity offered the puzzle. "I want you to try this," she said, handing over the folded sheet. "No expectations, no traps, just mathematics." The student blinked, eyes shifting from Trinity to the paper. "Is this the same puzzle Prof. Cromwell used to give?" Her voice was small, hesitant. Trinity nodded. "Yes, but now, it's yours." In that moment, the room felt vast. Empty benches, silent blackboard, afternoon light filtering through tall windows, dust motes floating like ghosts. The puzzle, once a symbol of humiliation, now felt like inheritance, a challenge offered on her own terms. The student unfolded it slowly. Her fingers brushed the first line, a theorem statement. She paused, then straightened. "May I?" "Please," Trinity said, her tone soft, encouraging. As the student bent over the paper, pen in hand, Trinity stepped back, She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes for a moment. Memory bristled at the back of her mind. The knuckles of professors, the cold hush after she solved it, the silence that screamed louder than applause. Now the silence was different. Clean. Intentional. Awaiting. Moments passed. The student's brow furrowed. Her pen traced lines. Paused. Traced again. Trinity watched in stillness, every muscle loose. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. This was about passing the torch. Suddenly a soft gasp. The student looked up, eyes wide. I think I see the path. Trinity opened her eyes all the way. A flame flickered in the student's gaze. Recognition, clarity, possibility. She bent forward again, writing quickly now, determination in every stroke. Trinity felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't vindication, it was reclamation. A soft knock sounded at the door. Trinity and the student startled, glancing over. The door opened slowly. A man walked past, gray hair, a tentative gait, eyes avoiding them. It was him, once powerful, now reduced, the former holder of the room's plaque. They passed without a glance, preoccupied by his own erasure. He didn't recognize them, or he recognized them, and pretended not to. Either way, he didn't stop. The student froze, pen in midair, but she didn't stop writing. Trinity didn't move. She watched him go. When the door clicked shut, she exhaled softly. Don't let him be your ghost, she said quietly to the student. Voice firm but calm. Let this puzzle be your ladder. The student nodded, eyes bright, breath trembling. Thank you. Trinity gave her a gentle smile softer than any she'd allowed herself in months. You're welcome. They sat together in that quiet hall, side by side, watching the student finish the proof. Not because they needed to show someone, but because they needed to remember what it felt like to belong. Later, Trinity left the building and walked across the quad. The doors clanged shut behind her. The evening light was gentle. Gothic spires softened under the dusk. Statues watching over lawns that would bear new footsteps soon. She felt lighter, not free, not unscarred, but lighter. Her phone buzzed as she walked. A message notification. She pulled it out. The screen lit up. Unknown sender, no name, no email address. Just a text. They'll never stop trying. Her breath caught. The kind of cold breath that travels deep into bones. Memories of closed rooms, of whispers, of blank files, of erased names, of silence waiting in the dark. She stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped the phone into her pocket. Night settled over the old stones of Cambridge. Gentle as a sigh, the windows of lecture halls glowed softly. Footsteps echoed on cobblestone. Somewhere, a door clicked. Somewhere else, a light went out. But Trinity kept walking. Step by step, away from the halls that tried to break her, and towards something else. She didn't know exactly what the future held. A position as professor, a foundation, a movement, possibly a whole academy. Maybe even the beginning of change across institutions like Cambridge. Systems built on centuries of silence. But she knew this for sure. The puzzle had been solved. And now it was alive again, carried by new hands, new minds, new stories. As Trinity stepped into the soft night air, the campus archway behind her framed the dark sky. Her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message, this one with an attachment. She paused. The name on the file was short, cruelly familiar. Backdoor deep, with only one line underneath. We never forget. She pressed download and the screen went dark. They tried to erase her like they erased so many before her. Quietly, completely, without a trace. But truth has a voice. And Trinity used hers. If you've ever felt silenced, unseen, or unwanted for who you are, type yes. If you believe in justice, subscribe if her story broke your heart and opened your eyes.